Hi everyone. A few little things that I wanted to cover for the simplicity of the life of level designers is how to use the foliage. And I know you guys already used a bit of grass around, but there are a few parameters that I want to cover. And also in terms of any kind of I guess foliage type like trees, grass, and things like that. It's better to use a foliage mode inside of the Unreal rather than placing them as individual items for optimization and simplicity purposes. So let me just do an example with this cube that can act as area that we want to populate with, say, grass and trees. So first let me do this texture on for better immersion. Alright, so you go inside of the modes to the foliage in here. You already can see that we already have the foliage that Renee is placed before, but let's just redo it again for the purpose of this. So let's say tutorial. So the few things that we need to know is in order to place the foliage thing that we want to use, we just navigate to the assets in the grass or the trees based on whatever we want to place around. Then in terms of the parameters, what we need to remember is the density is important. Radius is usually kept at 0 unless we place trees, because for grass, the closer the grass is, the better is the feel of the grass. And as you can see, they're kind of placed and submerged into the ground. In order to do just that, so let's have a comparison. We go inside of Z offset, so let's do say 5 for example and see how it looks. So now the grass is a little bit elevated, and so we just play around with this Z offset parameter until we get to the point where it kind of is submerged but not too far into the ground. So yeah, but 1 or 2 is good enough, I guess. We can leave it at 1 and 2, but it also depends on the size of the grass, which is the scale X parameter. So in order to have a little bit of variety in terms of the scale of the grass, we have to adjust the minimum and the maximum values. So let's put it to 1 and let's say 5 and see how it goes. Yeah, 5 is too much, so let's do the minimum of 0.5 and let's say 2.5. And it's kind of like trial and error thingy, and then yeah, look, it's also good to have something in comparison like the sprite of the character. So let's just duplicate this one for the purposes of scalability, and it's usually up to designer's discretion and just to see the size comparisons with the characters and the foliage. But I think as of now 2.5 should work. So if we go again to the foliage, the parameters that we care about is again scale, so that we have a little bit of variation in terms of the size of the grass, and then Z offset, so it doesn't really stick up too much or submerge too much. And then a few more parameters is the density and radius. Radius is only important for the trees, which I'll cover in a second. But in terms of the density, since we want grass to be full and rich and kind of cover as much space as possible, and since foliage mode is pretty much optimized, then we don't really care that we have thousands of those instances, so we can set it to say 350. And even then we have too much open spaces, so let's do it to 690. All right, and that way it gives us a little bit of an illusion that the field is covered with grass instances. So that is that. And then if you guys want to tweak the grass color a little bit, so the only thing you have to do is just to go inside of the grass material itself, and then you can adjust the grass color variation to something else, or grass color baseline, and then save it as a new material or a material instance, and then re-import this new grass inside of the foliage, and that way you have different grass variations to play around with. So if I want to do it really fast, let's do the instance, right? Go inside there, choose the grass color to be, I don't know, let's tweak it around to yellow or a little bit greenish, save it to that, and then color variation as well to, I don't know, just play around with a little bit of different color variation. So let's do red and save that stuff. Then we go back to the grass static mesh, duplicate it as well, and then go inside there, and in this case we want to connect it to this new grass color instance, and now we have a different variation of this grass. So again, we go back, we import it to the set of, grab the mesh, we import it to the foliage mode, and then again adjust those parameters that we just talked about. So let's do it a little bit different, like 0.3 and 2, and let's do the density to 700, for example, and let's adjust the Z offset to 0.5 and 1. And now we can also have two of them at the same time working around the same territory or around the same area. So if we click on both of them, we can have way more variety in terms of the grass placement, and it also saves a lot of time rather than placing them hand by hand. Similar thing applies to the trees. So if we go into the assets folder again, navigate to trees, which already should be pretty low poly in terms of optimization and stuff like that. So we have those two trees, two pine trees. One is a little bit taller, one is a little bit wider. So again, navigate to them. Make sure that now you kind of play around with radius as well, because if you have too much of a density and radius is 0, then it's gonna just really place them super narrowly together. So make sure that you actually play around with the values for radius, and make sure that they are kind of separated. So like the density have to be also decreased, because we don't need as many tree instances as the grass. So 5 is still too much, so let's play around with the radius value so they're kind of separated by some distance. Alright, let's do 1 for density. Oh, that's because I'm working with another one. Alright, so let's do 5 for density, 500 for radius. And now those trees are separated at least by the radius of 500 in between them. And it might be too much, so we can adjust it again to see that we have an appropriate distance in between them. So I think like 5 and 150 for radius works. So let's do this one. I don't know. Let's do a little bit different. 7 and which one was the other one? 150, and this one let's do 175. And now, since we have two types of trees, we can right away place them as the similar way as with the grass, but let's adjust the scale as well, so we have a little bit of variation there too. So probably 5 is too much, 1 or 3 should do it, and this one should be like 1, and let's say 2.5 to have a little bit of differentiation. And as we can see, it's really easy to just now place around the trees on the map. And this way it's also way more stable and optimized rather than in comparison with just individual objects in the scene. And I think that's about it in terms of the foliage. Hope that this breakdown helps a little bit in terms of the placement of the foliage around the scene, and yeah, make sure to remember to tweak those few parameters in order to have a little bit of variety, and let me know if you have any other questions.